Lost my virginity before marriage and my parents want me to prove my virginity to them. What should I do? Come from an extremely religious family. In my culture, women should be virgins before they get married. So here's how I lost my virginity. To my cousin. My parents are super strict. I grew up hiding everything from my parents. When I was 14, this new girl came to my school and she basically corrupted me. I had never in my life before even kissed a boy or even looked at one. But she would take me to parties and this is where I started meeting a lot of boys. A boy asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. This is where I had my first kiss. The next summer, my parents took me to visit my uncles. This is where I saw my cousin. We were both exactly the same age, and as soon as we saw each other, we were pretty much attracted to each other. I know, it's really disgusting and messed up. I was 15 at the time. This meant I didn't know anything about anything. My cousin would flirt with me all the time while we were visiting, and it kind of became a game for us. Before I knew it, he got me alone in a room and decided to kiss me. And after this, we just started making out all the time when we were alone. Then he started touching me. Now, no, I did not give him permission, but we were both 15, and it was just understood that we wanted it. And then we did the dirty. Like all night. Part 2 is up. Lost my virginity before marriage and my parents want me to prove that I'm a virgin. And I lost my virginity to my cousin. So the first time I did it with my cousin, we did it all night. This was the first time I had ever done anything like that. At the time, I didn't think that I would ever have to then prove to my parents that I was a virgin years later. So after I lost my virginity with my cousin, everything went downhill. I started doing it with other boys. And I even started dating a boy behind my parents' back. My parents, like I said, are super strict. When I was 17, my dad decided to tell me that he had already offered my hand in marriage to somebody. So that meant I was promised to somebody I had never even met. The boy that I was promised to lived in a different country. So 4 months later, he came with his parents. And when I met him, I was in love. He was extremely good looking, super smart, and he liked me right away. We were both really compatible in every single way. But then I remembered that I wasn't a virgin. The first night we met them, my parents brought up the fact that I was a virgin. My fiance looked at me with the biggest smile on his face. Not me sitting there knowing that I had already done it with 7 guys. From here on, I had to pretend like I was the perfect little virgin. So I basically cut off all the guys I was doing it with. Part 3 is up. Lost my virginity before marriage and now I have to prove that I'm a virgin to my parents. So after I lost my virginity to my cousin, I was screwed. My father promised my hand in marriage to a man who thought I was a virgin, and his parents celebrated the fact that I was a virgin. Anytime they came to dinner, we would always somehow end up talking about how I was a virgin. It was like the hot topic with my father and his dad. This is when the wheels started turning. I started thinking of ways to tell my family that I was no longer a virgin. And the only thing that I could come up with was telling them that I was R-worded. But that's obviously a horrible idea because then I would have to accuse somebody and it would just be bad. So I decided to just simply confess. I sat my parents down and I told them that I was no longer a virgin. But when they asked me with who, I could not tell them it was my cousin. Instead, I told them it was some random boy from school. That's when my father told me that I had to prove myself a virgin to get married. So I decided to go to a gynecologist and pay him to say that I was still intact. All he did was sign some piece of paper that said I was basically a virgin. So I gave it to my parents and they were happy with that. So guess what I did on my wedding night to pretend like I was a virgin? I saved some period blood. Part 4 is up. I had to pretend I was a virgin on my wedding night, and this is what I did. I saved some period blood from my last period. Since my father had promised me to a man that I had never met, who I did fall in love with, but I wasn't a virgin and was promised as a virgin, I had to do something. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, and my new husband and I were getting to know each other so well. So I knew that I did not want to disappoint him because he thought that I was a virgin. So when it came time to getting naked and actually doing it, I was already used to it, so I pretended like it hurt really bad when he put it in. Frozen my period blood in a Ziploc baggie, and I put it behind the bed underneath my pillow. So as soon as we finished, I had already scooped some blood into my hand and I just went ahead and rubbed it on. And it worked. He saw the blood, kissed me, and then we did it again. At this point, I just enjoyed it. No one will ever know this secret, and my husband thinks that I've only been his. So I guess it's a happy ending, right? I found my husband naked with his mom and then she punched me. Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My mother-in-law is the most toxic, violent woman I've ever met. And she hates me because I married her perfect little boy. Everything started 5 years ago. My husband and I met on Hinge. Neither of us was looking for a serious relationship, but we ended up falling in love. We started going out on dates, and every time we would go on a date, we would end up just spending a week together. Eventually, I got my dream job and I moved to New York City. I was working in fashion and making 6 figures a year. As you can imagine, my life was amazing. He asked me to be his girlfriend and we decided to do long distance. It was totally fine for the first couple of months. He was the one that decided to drive 5 hours to come see me. 2 months later, out of nowhere, he decided to propose. But the thing is, I wasn't sure if I should say yes. We hadn't been together long, and he was already offering to move to New York City with me. My life was so good in New York, I didn't know if I wanted him to come be with me. When I said I wasn't sure, his mother called me to convince me to marry him. Part 2 is a story time about how I found my husband naked with his mom and then she punched me. Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My mother-in-law calls me to convince me to marry her son. And guess what? She managed to convince me, so I said yes. We ended up moving to my apartment in in New York City 2 weeks later. That's when my personal nightmare began. My mother-in-law started coming over to our apartment every single weekend to plan the wedding. But all she cared about planning was my husband's stuff. For example, she only wanted to go try on his suits. We didn't even talk about my wedding dress. Then this woman had the audacity to plan the whole menu around his favorite foods. One day she comes up to me and says, "This is the menu for the wedding," without even asking me. No, I was not about to have corn dogs on the menu. Since we had a spare bedroom in our apartment, she started to sleep over. And she would tell my husband to sleep with her because apparently she was scared at night. At this point, she's planning the wedding. My husband is sleeping with her and my family is paying for it. Part 3 is caught my husband naked with his mom and then she punched me. Disclaimer is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. After she took over planning our wedding, we finally got married. I was so busy with work that at that point, I just didn't care. For the next few years, she started coming over to our apartment at least once a month. And she would sleep over. And sometimes my husband would sleep with her. I told my husband that it was kind of weird that they slept together and he told me that it wasn't. That they were just really close. One night I'm sleeping and I hear noises coming from the guest bedroom. I know that they're sleeping in there, so I walk over and open the door. That's when I see them fully naked. And my husband had his arm around her shoulder. Then she runs over to me and starts punching me. And then my husband tells me to get out. Then he gave me some bullshit excuse about how they're recreating childbirth. I kicked her out of the apartment. And my husband got mad at me. I no longer have a relationship with her and I'm thinking about leaving my husband. She still comes to our apartment and just flat out ignores me. What should I do? Story time about my crazy celebrity ex. I met my ex when I was working at a strip club. I know, not a great place to meet a guy. I was a cocktail waitress and the club was named Deja Vu. It was in the valley, like right by Van Nuys. I'm sure you guys want to know why I worked there. Paid good money, I was a cocktail waitress, and my apartment was about 5 minutes from the club. I was completely broke at the time. I had just moved to LA, and my fiance at the time, which you guys already know about, he wasn't making a lot of money. He wasn't trying to make more money, so I was the one having to pay the bills. After I was sexually assaulted at the club by that guy I told you guys about already, I didn't go to work for about 4 or 5 days. When I did go back to the club, I asked to be put behind the bar. That was the night I met my ex. When I saw him come in, I recognized his face right away. I knew he was an actor, but I didn't know what from. Then he came up to the bar and would not leave me alone. Part 2 is a story time about my crazy celebrity ex. I'm standing at the bar at the strip club and I see him come in. After a while, he comes back to the bar, and as soon as he sees me, you guys, he's just acting like I'm the most beautiful thing on the planet. Introduced himself to me, like shook my hand. Said something like, "God, your eyes are so beautiful. You're so stunning." This was over 10 years ago, so I'm trying to remember exactly what he said. Immediately, I'm attracted to him. He's extremely attractive. Before that, I had never been love bombed before, so him talking to me the way he was talking to me, I was just like, oh my god, wow. He starts asking me a ton of questions. Where I'm from, where I live, blah, 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 blah. He's at the bar with me for like 30 minutes. I finally say to him, like, don't you want to go get some dances from the girls? And he said that he only wanted to talk to me. Another hour passes by, he's still there talking to me. Then he finally says, do you want to have breakfast with me? But I kept saying no until I said yes. Part 3 is up. Story time about my abusive celebrity ex. He asked me out so many times I finally said yes and gave him my number. What was I thinking? A few days later, we go out to dinner. He pays for everything. At this point, I had never been treated like that. Fiance, who I'd just broken up with a week before, was not paying for the bill, so I was essentially paying for everything. And this guy was whining and dining me. On our second date, I went back to his place and we did end up doing the dirty. And this kind of solidified the whole relationship. It was magical. He was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen, and he was completely obsessed with me. After that, we're essentially in a relationship. But a few weeks later, he calls me to tell me he has a substance problem. I think I can change him, so I decide to stay with him. A few weeks after that, he asked me to marry him while we're taking a shower together, and I said I wasn't sure. I mean, why would I say yes to marrying him so soon? After that, he went to his closet to do substances. When he came out, he was a completely different person. And he started accusing me of being a slut, of sleeping with other guys, and a few days later is when he slapped me for the first time. I'm sorry, I think I'm gonna have to do a part 4 tomorrow. Bye. Am I evil for catfishing my high school teacher into believing he was in a 2-month relationship with me and then got his wife to divorce him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I was determined to get perfect grades when I was in high school. My goal being an Ivy League school. My mother was single, so she was raising me on her own, and she was constantly broke. She drank a lot and partied a lot, so I can't say I feel bad for her. I knew I had no choice but to be absolutely perfect in school. For some reason, my calculus teacher never liked me. In fact, he went out of his way to make things impossible for me. He gave us a surprise quiz one day and I got a D. After that, I started studying even harder. I did extra hours in the lab, and the next test, I got an A. Apparently, he didn't like this, and on the next test, he gave me an F. I got so pissed. I made an account on Facebook, found pictures of a girl on Google, and started uploading them. And then I messaged him. God, he was so stupid he fell for it. I messaged him every single day. I would even find random body parts and send them to him. After a month, he started asking to meet up. This is when I decided to start saying inappropriate things, if you get my drift. Oh, and he got raunchy. Then he started saying things like, I love you. So I started saying it back. After 2 months, I printed everything out and sent it to his wife. She divorced him a week later. I cornered him in a hallway and told him it was me. I confirmed it by describing his little peepee. He was so embarrassed. He passed me with flying colors. And I did go to an Ivy League. I caught my dad cheating with my best friend, and he doesn't want me to tell my mom. Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My dad and I have never gotten along. He's the type of dad that whenever I bring my friends over, he's literally always flirting with them. He'll make sure to be home when he knows my friends are coming. He's really into bodybuilding, so he's pretty fit. So he'll just walk out shirtless into the kitchen while my friends and I are having lunch. I'm constantly telling him to cover up because it's totally embarrassing. 2 weeks ago, I noticed something weird. My best friend was drinking a Starbucks in the kitchen, and when I came into the kitchen, I saw her and my dad quickly let go of their hands. Like they were holding hands. Of course, they played it off and I didn't say anything. Our backyard has a pool house, and that's usually where my dad hangs out. By the way, my mom is an amazing woman. She owns a Pilates studio and basically pays for everything. Go to the pool house, and that's when I find my dad going down on my best friend. His head was up underneath her skirt. I literally vomited as soon as I saw it. Part 2, that's when I see my dad's head underneath my friend's skirt because he was going down on her. I actually vomited right then and there. As I'm vomiting outside of the pool house, my dad runs over to me and says, "What you saw is a mistake." And I say, "Of course it was a mistake, because you're gonna go rectify this right now." I handed him my cell phone so that he could call my mom. He grabbed my cell phone and threw it into the pool. Then my best friend comes out like nothing happened. He looks at me and says, "Will you please just stop overreacting? It's not that big a deal." I grabbed her by her hair and threw her down on the floor. And then I just started attacking her. So angry at my dad, I was even angrier with her. How could she? My dad pulls me off of her and she starts confessing to everything. Apparently, they've been doing it for a month. Whenever she comes to hang out with me, she'll stay in the pool house, hide in there for hours, and wait for my dad to come home. He was never my best friend. By the way, my best friend and I are both 22. My dad is 47. Here's the worst part. He swore me to secrecy and I agreed. Now they just make out in front of me. Part 3 is up. My dad will just start making out with my best friend in front of me. At this point, he doesn't care. Disclaimer, is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My mom has had a hard time. This would tear my mom apart. I told my dad that if he doesn't stop this, I'm gonna have to move out of the house. This really woke him up though. He told my best friend that he couldn't keep seeing her. And now she's going crazy. She won't stop calling his cell phone or mine. She'll just show up to our house. Then I caught them doing it again. Of course, I threatened to move out again. Don't know how to handle this situation. What should I do? Story time about how my date broke into my house and tried to choke me. Disclaimer, is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. 2 years ago, I signed up to Hinge. I matched with a really cute guy. He lived in my city, drove an expensive car, and was looking for fun. At the time, I was not looking for a relationship. I just wanted to have some fun. It was lust at first sight. We were both attracted to each other and he couldn't keep his hands off me. Now, I did like this, but he was taking it a little bit far. We were sitting at a booth and had some drinks. This is when he kissed me. He did not ask me for permission and he put his hand on my thigh. I let him do it because I knew I was having fun. But then he started inviting himself over to my apartment. I told him that I was definitely not comfortable with him coming over. He made a joke about following me home and coming in and doing whatever he wanted to me. I laughed it off but was creeped out. I told him I got gassy and that I needed to go home. What was about to happen was terrifying. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my date broke into my house and tried to choke me. Disclaimer, is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I lied and told him that I was getting gassy and I needed to go home. We say goodbye in the restaurant and he walks me to my car. I drive off and I check if he's following me. No, he wasn't. As soon as I get home, I decide to order pizza because I was still hungry. I mean, I actually was not gassy. While I'm waiting for the pizza to arrive, I run a bath and put my music on as loud as possible. By the way, I live alone and my house is pretty big. I decide to take a quick shower to take my makeup off, and 5 minutes into my shower, my phone starts to ring. It's my date. He says, "Are you sure you don't want me to come over? You look lonely." I told him, "How do you know what I look like?" Then he says, "Just send me your address." I did not. I hung up and blocked him right away. I get out of the shower and I hear the doorbell ring. When I open the door, nobody is there. What happens next is terrifying. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my date broke into my house and tried to choke me. I open my front door and nobody is there. Remember, I thought it was the pizza guy. I look closer, and that's when I see a dark figure standing in the corner. Can you imagine how scary that is? My knees instantly started to shake, and that's when I realized it was my date. I told him if he left now, I wouldn't call the cops. Then he runs at me while taking off his belt, puts the belt around my neck and starts squeezing so hard. I almost immediately passed out. I was wearing a bathrobe. He ripped it off of me. Then he said the creepiest thing. "I want to see what you look like passed out." Then the doorbell rings. It's the pizza guy. He finally lets go and tells me that he'll be back. I run outside and the pizza guy stays with me until the cops come. Unfortunately, the police never found him. He obviously lied about his name. I'm afraid he's gonna come back for me. What should I do? My ex-boyfriend is threatening to expose our SEX tape if I don't get back with him. Disclaimer, is not my story time. If send me on Instagram. I broke up with my ex 3 months ago, and it's become my personal nightmare. We actually only dated for 6 months on and off. At the time, I didn't know it, but he was definitely love bombing me from the beginning. At the time, I didn't even know what that was. Not until I started watching TikTok. We met at a bar, which is the worst place to meet a guy, by the way. He was all over me the first night he met me. He was trying to kiss my neck, and he even tried to grab my butt. I told him he needed to calm down, and he did. The following week, he managed to get a hold of my friend on Instagram, and he convinced my friend to give him my number. And my stupid-ass friend gave it to him. He was extremely manipulative, too. I later found out that my friend had a crush on him, so she was just trying to give him my number so she had an excuse to talk to him. Once this man got my number, it was a constant barrage of text messages. He would text me every single morning. He would send me selfies, and all of this without my permission. I've only dated broke guys in the past, and my ex has a lot of money. So I decided to go out with him just to get a free dinner. Biggest biggest mistake of my life. He forced a kiss on me on our first date. Part 2 is up. He actually forced me to kiss him on our first date. Story time about how my ex is threatening to expose our sex tape if I don't get back with him. Disclaimer, is not my story time, instead of my Instagram. After he forced me to kiss him, I slapped him and he liked it. He actually said, "I'd like that." I know this sounds terrible, but I kinda liked it. So then I went on a second date with him. He was really quick to do the dirty. He would always be grabbing or touching me. Anytime we were alone, even if it was for 5 seconds, this man would just pounce on me. He was literally and utterly obsessed with sex. Don't get me wrong, it definitely was overwhelming, but I had never been with somebody who was so passionate. But then came the jealousy. He was constantly worried about who I was with. He was always showing up to places where I told him I'd be. Even if I was having dinner with friends, this man would show up. He would show up uninvited to my house. Before I knew it, 5 months had passed. This is when my parents started trying to convince me to break up with him. They hated that he always came around to the house even when we were all having dinner. He would just show up and sit down with us. My father especially hated him. He would also grab me in front of my parents and try to do stuff. Part 3 is up. In front of my parents, he would always try to kiss me and touch me. My father hated this guy. Story time about how my ex is threatening to expose our sex tape if I don't get back with him. One night I go over to his apartment, which he lives in a penthouse, and he tells me that he has something fun planned for us. I went into his bedroom and he had this whole setup. Cameras, chains tied to the bed, handcuffs. It was like 365 days in there, or 50 Shades of Grey. This man knew how to get me to do whatever he wanted. He started kissing my neck and we started doing it. I knew the camera was there, but it didn't bother me. I never thought that he would ever try to use it against me. Fast forward 3 weeks later, I break up with him. He decides to start stalking me and then sends me the video. He told me he'd give it to me if I went to his apartment. I go to his apartment and he basically attacks me. Pushes me down on the couch and tries to do it with me. Then he told me that if I didn't get back with him, he'd expose me. I got back with him. He's on his best behavior. What should I do? Update on how my boyfriend is threatening to expose our sex tape if I don't get back with him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. Like I said in part 3, he's on his best behavior and it's been 2 weeks now. I'm constantly being told by him that he's never going to release the tape as long as I stay with him. Now he's acting like the best boyfriend ever. He's treating my parents with respect. He's even given me money to give my parents. You guys won't believe what he did. The day I took him back after he threatened me, asked for permission to come to my house and have dinner with my parents. Like I said before, he wasn't asking for permission to show up at my house. That's when he tells my parents that he wants to take care of us, meaning he wants to give us an allowance. Immediately, my parents were happy. I thought they were going to say no, and my dad was like, absolutely. We love you. We accept you. And now my parents are pressuring me to stay with him because he's giving them money. He's giving my dad $2,500 a month, which is enough to cover the mortgage payment. My parents don't know about the sex tape, and I don't know if I should tell them. Part 5 is up. My boyfriend is threatening to expose our sex tape if I don't stay with him. This is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. Now that he's giving my parents money, of course my parents want me to stay with him. This just goes from bad to worse. I actually started falling in love with him again because he's been behaving so good. We've been doing it like crazy and he's always with me. Even if I'm working in my apartment, he'll just come over and make me dinner. Or he'll do my laundry, something he never used to do. 2 nights ago, I asked him why he was still threatening me with the sex tape. That's when he told me that he had a fear of losing me. I explained to him that he'll never lose me because we have a great relationship. That's when he looks at me and says, as soon as I delete that video, you'll leave me. And he grabbed me by the neck. Part 6 is up. My boyfriend is threatening to expose our sex tape if I don't stay with him. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. That's when he grabbed me by the neck and told me that I belonged to him and that nobody else could ever touch me ever again. I told him that I didn't want anyone else. Once he fell asleep, I took your guys' advice. I looked for the tape and I finally found it. He put it in a safe and he forgot that he told me the code. I immediately left his apartment and went straight home. I went to the cops the next morning and they told me that the only way that I could prove that he was threatening me was if I had a text message or a recording, that they can't just go arrest him because he told me. Here's where you guys are gonna get mad at me. I didn't break up with him. I told him that I would keep the tape. And surprisingly, he accepted. But he doesn't know that I went to the police. My parents still don't know. He's still extremely possessive and jealous and is constantly all over me, but I guess I kind of like that as long as he doesn't go back to being crazy. Now I'm just afraid that he'll try to record us again or that he has a copy. Oh my god, do you guys think he has a copy? He also bought me a new car 2 days ago. What should I do?